If you're here right now, there's a good chance the market day is already over. The charts are closed, the room is quiet, and yet part of your mind still feels like it should be paying attention. Gold has a way of doing that. Even when nothing is happening, it can feel like something might. And that feeling alone is often enough to keep the brain alert, scanning, waiting, as if rest would mean missing something important. What's gentle to realize is that this state isn't caused by the market itself. It's caused by the way the human brain relates to time, uncertainty, and responsibility. Research in stress physiology, especially the work of Robert Sapolsky, shows that the nervous system stays activated not only by real threats, but by anticipated ones. The brain doesn't need action to stay awake. It only needs the belief that vigilance is required. With gold, that belief can quietly linger long after the screen goes dark. This video is built around a simple, calming truth. Gold will be there tomorrow. It doesn't need to be watched tonight. It doesn't need to be mentally rehearsed. It doesn't need a plan formed in the quiet hours. And understanding why that's hard to accept is often the first step toward letting the mind finally rest. Many overthinking traders carry an invisible sense of responsibility into the night. The feeling that if they stop paying attention, something will slip through the cracks. Behavioral psychology explains this through what's called future-oriented rumination. The brain imagines tomorrow's uncertainty and tries to resolve it in advance, even though resolution isn't possible yet. Daniel Kahneman's research on cognitive load shows that this mental effort doesn't lead to better outcomes. It only leads to fatigue. The mind works harder, not wiser. Tonight, this video isn't asking you to change your relationship with gold. It's simply offering a different way to understand it. Gold moves through time whether or not it's being monitored. Markets unfold across days, weeks, and years, while the nervous system evolved to react in moments. That mismatch is where restlessness is born. When the brain mistakes long-term processes for short-term emergencies, it stays on duty far longer than necessary. As you listen, you don't need to follow closely or remember anything. The pacing is slow by design. The goal isn't insight that energizes, but understanding that settles. Sleep research, including the work of Matthew Walker, shows that rest is when the brain integrates uncertainty and releases emotional tension. But it can only do that when it feels safe enough to disengage. Understanding helps create that safety. This is a calm market story for the hours when thinking feels heavy and the future feels too close. There are no lessons waiting at the end, no actions to take, no conclusions to reach, just context, just reassurance, just a quiet reminder that nothing essential is being delayed by rest. Gold will be there tomorrow. For now, it doesn't need you. And once the mind understands that, it often discovers that sleep arrives on its own. One of the quietest sources of tension for overthinking traders is something that rarely gets named directly: the illusion of urgency. Gold is especially good at creating it. Even on days when nothing dramatic happens, the mind can feel as if attention is required, as if something important is unfolding right now or just about to. This sense of urgency doesn't usually announce itself loudly. It feels subtle, responsible, even sensible. And that's why it's so effective at keeping the brain awake. What helps is understanding that urgency is not the same thing as importance. Gold is important. It always has been. But importance does not automatically mean immediacy. The nervous system, however, isn't very good at telling the difference. Neuroscience research shows that when uncertainty is paired with perceived value, the brain's alert systems stay engaged. The amygdala and related threat detection circuits don't ask whether action is required. They ask whether attention might be useful. And might be useful is often enough to prevent rest. Gold sits in a unique psychological position. It's tied to safety, fear, protection, crisis, and permanence all at once. Those themes register deeply, even if you're not consciously thinking about them. Behavioral economists like Daniel Kahneman have shown that humans overreact to situations where loss feels possible and meaning feels high. The brain doesn't calmly wait for clarity. It leans forward. It stays ready. It treats uncertainty as if it were time-sensitive, even when it isn't. This is how the illusion of urgency forms. The market hasn't asked you to do anything. There's no decision to be made right now, and yet the mind feels as if staying alert is the responsible choice. Stress physiology research, especially Robert Sapolsky's work, explains that the body can remain in a low-level stress response simply because it anticipates a future demand. The demand doesn't have to arrive. The anticipation alone is enough. At night, this becomes more noticeable. Without external tasks to focus on, the mind turns inward. It checks the day. It replays moments. It scans the future. Gold often becomes the anchor for this scanning because it feels unfinished, open, and significant. The illusion whispers, just stay aware a little longer. And because that voice doesn't sound panicked, it often goes unquestioned. But here's the calming truth. Urgency in markets is often a psychological state, not a real-time requirement. Gold trades around the clock in different parts of the world, across different time zones through systems that don't pause for individual attention. Its continuity is one of its defining characteristics. Nothing meaningful about gold depends on whether your mind is watching it at midnight. Understanding this doesn't make you careless. It makes you accurate. The brain struggles with this because it evolved in environments where immediacy mattered. If something important was happening, attention was required. That rule worked when threats and opportunities were physical and local. In abstract systems like financial markets, that same rule misfires. The brain applies an ancient pattern to a modern context. Evolutionary psychology shows that these mismatches are common sources of anxiety and rumination. The system isn't broken. It's outdated. When you notice that restless feeling at night, it's not a signal that something is wrong. It's a signal that the brain has confused importance with urgency. Cognitive science refers to this as misattributed salience. The mind assigns now to something that exists across time. And once that assignment is made, it feels difficult to disengage. What softens this is perspective. Not forced calm, not distraction, but understanding. When the brain understands that gold's relevance is distributed over long timelines, the pressure to monitor it moment by moment begins to ease. Research on stress reduction consistently shows that reinterpreting the meaning of a situation lowers physiological arousal more effectively than trying to suppress thoughts. You don't calm the system by telling it to stop. You calm it by helping it see that nothing urgent is being asked of it. This is why repeating the simple idea, gold will be there tomorrow, can feel surprisingly powerful. It's not a mantra, it's a correction. It realigns the mind's sense of time. Tomorrow is not a risk, it's a certainty. Gold's continuity is one of the few things you can rely on without effort. When the nervous system absorbs that, vigilance becomes unnecessary. Sleep researchers have found that cognitive arousal, not physical alertness, is the main barrier to rest. The body can be exhausted, but if the mind feels responsible for something urgent, sleep stays out of reach. By gently dissolving the illusion of urgency, you remove the reason for that responsibility. The mind no longer needs to stand guard. As this understanding settles in, you may notice that thoughts don't disappear, but they lose their sharpness. They stop demanding immediate attention. They become background noise rather than instructions. This is not disengagement from reality. It's alignment with it. Gold is still important. The market is still meaningful. But tonight, none of it requires your supervision. This video continues by exploring how the brain learned to equate watching with safety, and how that belief can be updated without force. For now, it's enough to recognize that urgency is often a feeling, not a fact. And once the mind sees that clearly, rest becomes not only possible, but natural. There's a belief that quietly follows many traders into the night, and it often sounds reasonable enough that it goes unchallenged. It's the idea that watching equals safety, that if you stay mentally connected to gold, if you keep it somewhere in awareness, you're being responsible. You're staying prepared. You're doing what a serious trader should do. This belief doesn't feel anxious. It feels careful. And that's exactly why it's so powerful. From the brain's point of view, vigilance has always been protective. For most of human history, paying attention meant survival. If something valuable or dangerous was present, staying alert reduced risk. Evolutionary psychology explains that the nervous system learned to associate awareness with safety and disengagement with vulnerability. That rule worked well in environments where threats were immediate and physical. But in abstract systems like markets, the same rule can quietly turn against us. Gold is particularly effective at activating this old pattern. It's important, it's uncertain, and it's connected to themes the brain takes seriously: security, fear, stability, loss. When those themes are present, the nervous system assumes that attention might be needed, even if no action is possible. Research on anticipatory stress shows that the body can stay activated simply because it believes preparation is required. The preparation doesn't have to lead anywhere. The belief alone keeps the system alert. At night, this belief becomes more visible. The mind checks in on gold, not because there's something to do, but because it feels like letting go would be irresponsible. What if something happens? What if I should have thought this through? These thoughts aren't predictions. They're expressions of a safety strategy. The brain is trying to protect you by staying connected to something it considers meaningful. Neuroscience helps explain why this is so hard to interrupt. The brain's threat and reward systems don't distinguish between real-time demands and imagined ones. Once attention is assigned, disengaging can feel uncomfortable, even unsafe. Robert Sapolsky's research on stress responses shows that when the brain anticipates a future challenge, stress hormones can remain elevated without any external trigger. This is why you can feel tense even in a quiet room with nothing happening. What's calming to realize is that watching does not actually make markets safer. It only makes the watcher more tired. Gold doesn't respond to attention. It doesn't accelerate or slow based on awareness. It moves through systems far larger than individual monitoring. Behavioral economics shows that humans often overestimate the value of vigilance in complex systems. We feel better when we're watching, but the outcome doesn't change. This creates a subtle trap. The relief that comes from staying alert is mistaken for effectiveness. The mind thinks, I feel less anxious when I'm paying attention, so paying attention must be helping. In reality, the relief comes from satisfying the brain's demand for vigilance, not from improving the situation. It's the same mechanism behind checking behaviors in anxiety. The checking reduces discomfort temporarily, but reinforces the belief that checking is necessary. Gold amplifies this because it doesn't offer clear stopping points. There's no moment when it says, you're done for today. Markets don't close psychologically, even when they close technically. The brain keeps the loop open, assuming that staying connected is the safest option. Cognitive psychology refers to this as a failure to disengage from goal monitoring. The goal isn't explicit, but the monitoring continues anyway. The gentle shift comes when the mind learns that safety doesn't require awareness right now. This isn't about forcing detachment. It's about updating an outdated rule. Modern stress research shows that the nervous system calms when it correctly assesses that no action is required. Safety comes not from vigilance, but from accurate appraisal. Tonight, there is no threat to respond to, no decision that can be improved by thinking, no protection that attention can offer. When this understanding settles in, something changes. The urge to monitor weakens, not because you've decided to stop caring, but because the brain no longer believes caring requires constant attention. The system stands down on its own. Thoughts may still appear, but they don't carry the same weight. They don't feel like instructions. They feel like echoes. Sleep becomes possible when the mind stops acting as a guard. Research on insomnia consistently shows that perceived responsibility is one of the strongest drivers of nighttime arousal. When people feel responsible for preventing something, rest feels unsafe. When that responsibility is released, the body naturally shifts into recovery mode. Parasympathetic activity increases. Breathing slows, muscles soften. This video is built to help that release happen gently. By understanding why the brain equated watching with safety in the first place, you don't have to argue with it. You don't have to push it away. You simply show it that the context has changed. Gold will continue without supervision. Tomorrow will arrive without rehearsal. And tonight, nothing needs guarding. As you listen, you may notice the impulse to check begin to fade. Not because you're trying to resist it, but because it no longer feels necessary. The mind learns that rest is not negligence. It's accuracy. And once that lesson is absorbed, sleep stops being something you chase and starts being something you allow. There is a quiet mismatch at the heart of why gold can feel so heavy on the mind at night, and it has very little to do with intelligence, discipline, or experience. It has to do with time. Markets move through long, continuous timelines, while the human nervous system evolved to react in short, emotionally charged moments. When these two systems meet, tension appears. Gold unfolds across days, weeks, and years, but the brain experiences it in fragments, snapshots, and feelings that demand immediate resolution. Research in cognitive psychology shows that humans don't perceive time evenly. We compress the future and magnify the present, especially under uncertainty. This is known as temporal discounting. The brain assigns more weight to what feels immediate, even when what's immediate isn't actually actionable. With gold, this creates a strange illusion. The market feels like it's happening now, even when nothing meaningful can be done now. The mind treats long-term processes as short-term emergencies, simply because they're emotionally salient. Gold makes this easier for the brain because it resists clear narratives. It doesn't move in neat, explainable steps. It reacts to forces that unfold slowly and invisibly. Inflation expectations, policy shifts, global confidence. These aren't events with sharp edges, they're processes. The market reflects them gradually, but the brain wants conclusions quickly. Behavioral research shows that when people are exposed to ambiguous information, they try to resolve it by mentally simulating outcomes. The mind runs ahead of time, rehearsing futures that haven't arrived yet. This is why nights can feel especially restless. When external input drops, the default mode network of the brain becomes more active. This network is responsible for imagination, future thinking, and self-referential stories. Neuroscience studies show that this system lights up when we're alone with our thoughts, especially when something unresolved feels important. Gold often occupies that space because it represents unfinished time. Tomorrow, next week, next month. The brain keeps leaning forward, trying to live in a future that hasn't happened yet. What is important to realize is that this forward movement of the mind doesn't actually align with how markets function. Markets don't reward anticipation without context. They don't respond to rehearsal. They unfold according to forces that operate independently of individual attention. When the mind tries to keep pace with that by projecting itself into the future, it exhausts itself. Stress research shows that sustained future-oriented thinking increases physiological arousal without improving outcomes. The body stays tense, but nothing changes. Gold doesn't need to be understood moment by moment. It exists across time in a way the nervous system isn't naturally built to track. This doesn't mean the brain is failing. It means it's doing what it evolved to do, respond quickly to things that feel important. The problem is not the response, but the context. Once the brain understands that gold's timeline is not the same as its own, the pressure to keep up begins to ease. Sleep becomes difficult when the mind feels like it's falling behind, as if rest would mean losing time, missing something, or arriving late to tomorrow. But sleep is not a pause in time. It's part of how the brain recalibrates its sense of time. Research in sleep science, including the work of Matthew Walker, shows that sleep helps integrate experiences and reset emotional responses. It brings perspective back into balance. Without sleep, the brain stays stuck in urgency. With sleep, the future becomes less pressing. When you allow yourself to rest, you're not stepping out of the market's timeline. You're stepping back into your own. The mind stops racing ahead. It returns to the present. This is where calm begins. Not by forcing thoughts away, but by letting time expand again. By remembering that gold doesn't require moment-to-moment companionship. It exists whether you're watching or not. As this understanding settles in, the sense of pressure softens. Tomorrow feels less close. Tonight feels more complete. The market story doesn't need to be finished before sleep. It can continue on its own. And when the mind no longer feels responsible for staying ahead of time, it finally allows itself to rest within it. There is a moment late in the day when thinking about gold stops being useful and quietly turns into something else. It no longer feels like analysis. It feels like circling. The same thoughts return, slightly rearranged, as if the mind believes that one more pass will finally bring a sense of completion. This is where many traders begin to judge themselves. Why can't I let this go? Why am I still thinking about this? But what's really happening here has very little to do with discipline or control. It has everything to do with the brain's need for closure. Psychology has long shown that the human mind is uncomfortable with open loops. When something important feels unfinished, attention sticks to it. In the early 20th century, Bluma Zygarnik observed that people remembered interrupted or incomplete tasks far more vividly than completed ones. This effect has been replicated many times since. Unfinished experiences don't just sit quietly in memory. They remain active, pulling at attention, asking to be resolved. Gold creates these open loops naturally, not because you did something wrong, but because it rarely offers clean emotional endings. Markets don't close stories the way the brain wants them to. There's no final sentence at the end of the day that says this is what today meant. Gold in particular reflects slow, ongoing forces that don't resolve neatly. When the mind expects a conclusion and doesn't get one, it keeps working. It replays, reframes, and rechecks. This isn't obsession. It's an attempt to finish something that feels incomplete. Cognitive psychology describes this as a search for closure, not a search for answers. At night, this search becomes louder. Without distractions, the mind returns to what still feels open. It's not trying to predict tomorrow. It's trying to end today. Research on rumination shows that the brain often revisits experiences not to change them, but to emotionally integrate them. The problem with gold is that integration through thinking rarely works. There is no final interpretation that suddenly makes everything feel complete. So the loop stays open and the mind stays active. This is where understanding brings relief. When you realize that the restlessness isn't asking for insight, but for permission to stop, the dynamic shifts. Closure doesn't require certainty. It requires acknowledgement. The brain needs to know that it is allowed to set something down, even if it isn't fully understood. Studies on emotional regulation show that labeling and contextualizing an experience reduces physiological arousal. When you can say, "This feels unfinished because this market doesn't finish daily stories," the nervous system begins to relax. Gold is especially challenging because it invites meaning without offering conclusions. It feels important, but not complete. The mind mistakes this for a personal task. It assumes that if it keeps thinking, closure will arrive. But closure in markets doesn't come from thinking harder. It comes from time passing. And time passing doesn't require your attention. Sleep is one of the brain's primary tools for closure. Neuroscience research, including work by Matthew Walker, shows that sleep helps the brain process emotional experiences and reduce their intensity. During sleep, especially REM sleep, emotional memories are revisited in a calmer neurochemical environment. This is how the brain finishes what waking consciousness cannot. But this process can only begin when the mind stops insisting on finishing things while awake. Many overthinking traders unknowingly block this by treating sleep as something that must be earned through understanding. They wait to feel settled before resting, rather than resting to allow settling to occur. This keeps the loop open. The brain stays alert because it believes something is still pending. Once you understand that closure is a biological process, not a cognitive one, the pressure eases. You no longer need to solve the day. You only need to allow it to close. As this realization sinks in, the mental tone changes. Thoughts may still arise, but they don't feel urgent. They don't feel like unfinished business. They feel like loose threads that no longer need pulling. The mind begins to accept that tonight doesn't require a conclusion. Gold can remain partially understood. The story can pause mid-sentence. Nothing is lost by that. This video continues by exploring how letting tomorrow exist without rehearsal completes this process even further. For now, it's enough to know that overthinking is not a flaw. It's a search for closure in a system that doesn't offer it on demand. Once the mind understands that, it no longer has to stay awake waiting. There is a final, quiet shift that happens when the mind begins to relax around gold, and it is one of the most relieving realizations a trader can have. Tomorrow does not require rehearsal. The future doesn't need to be practiced in advance for it to arrive safely. And yet, many restless nights are spent doing exactly that, mentally stepping into tomorrow, imagining scenarios, preparing responses, trying to feel ready. This habit doesn't come from fear alone. It comes from care. The mind believes that thinking ahead is a form of responsibility. From a psychological point of view, this is known as future simulation. The brain evolved the ability to imagine what comes next, so it could prepare for danger or opportunity. Under uncertainty, this system becomes more active. Research in cognitive neuroscience shows that when outcomes are ambiguous and meaningful, the brain naturally runs simulations of possible futures. Gold, with its symbolic weight and unpredictability, gives this system plenty to work with. The problem is that simulation doesn't shut itself off easily, especially at night. What's important to understand is that imagining tomorrow does not make tomorrow safer. It only makes tonight heavier. Studies on anticipatory anxiety show that repeated future simulation increases stress hormones without improving performance or outcomes. The body stays in a state of readiness for something that isn't happening yet. The nervous system doesn't experience this as preparation. It experiences it as prolonged activation. This is one of the reasons sleep feels out of reach, even when the day is over. Gold doesn't need a mental presence overnight to function properly. It will open, move, respond, and reflect global forces, whether or not it has been thought about. When the brain understands this at a deeper level, not just logically, but emotionally, it begins to release its grip on tomorrow. This is not indifference. It's trust in continuity. Gold's persistence across time is one of its defining characteristics. It doesn't disappear in the absence of attention. Sleep science offers an important insight here. According to research by Matthew Walker and others, sleep is the brain's primary mechanism for emotional recalibration. During sleep, especially deep and REM stages, the brain processes uncertainty, softens emotional intensity, and restores balance to stress systems. In other words, sleep prepares you for tomorrow far more effectively than thinking about tomorrow ever could. When the mind insists on staying awake to prepare, it delays the very process that actually helps. Many overthinking traders unconsciously reverse this relationship. They wait to feel ready before sleeping, instead of sleeping to become ready. This keeps the nervous system locked in a loop of imagined responsibility. Psychological studies on insomnia consistently show that perceived obligation is one of the strongest drivers of nighttime arousal. When people believe they are needed for something, even symbolically, rest feels unsafe. Letting tomorrow exist without you is not avoidance. It's a correction. There's a gentle relief that comes with realizing that the future doesn't need guarding. Tomorrow is not fragile. It doesn't depend on tonight's vigilance. Gold will still reflect uncertainty, opportunity, and meaning when you wake up, but you will meet it with a clearer mind, not because you stayed alert, but because you allowed your system to reset. As this realization settles in, the mind's relationship with time begins to soften. The future feels a little farther away. The present feels more complete. Thoughts about gold may still appear, but they no longer pull you forward. They pass through without demanding action. This is a sign that the nervous system has received the message it was waiting for. Nothing is required right now. This is where sleep stops being something you try to achieve and starts being something that happens. The body recognizes safety. Breathing deepens. Muscles release. The mind no longer feels like it's abandoning a task by resting. It feels like it's allowing the right process to take over. This video moves next toward gently closing the day as a whole, bringing together everything you've heard into a sense of completion. For now, it's enough to let tomorrow stand on its own. You don't need to visit it tonight. Gold will be there when you wake up, and your mind can finally allow itself to be here, and then to rest. As this story comes to a close, there's nothing left to carry forward into the night. The market has been set down gently, not solved, not dismissed, just placed where it belongs. If your thoughts feel a little quieter now, or if the sense of pressure you arrived with has softened, that's not something you forced. It's what happens when understanding replaces responsibility. Gold no longer needs to be held in the mind to continue existing. The day is allowed to end. Nothing you heard here was meant to change how you trade or what you decide tomorrow. This space isn't about improvement or discipline. It's about relief. It's about recognizing that the restlessness you feel isn't a flaw, but a natural response to uncertainty and meaning. Once that response is understood, it no longer needs to stay active. The nervous system can finally stand down. If there's one quiet takeaway to carry with you, it's this: nothing important is being delayed by rest. Gold does not move faster when watched, and it does not disappear when you look away. Tomorrow will arrive whether or not it's rehearsed tonight. Sleep is not a pause in responsibility. It's the process that restores perspective and balance, understanding that allows the mind to let go without resistance. You don't need to remember every idea from this video. You don't need to apply anything. The benefit comes from exposure, from hearing these patterns named and explained until the brain recognizes itself in them. Over time, this understanding settles in quietly. Nights become lighter. The urge to monitor fades. The market feels less personal, not because you care less, but because you're no longer carrying it alone. If this video helped you feel more at ease, even slightly, then this channel exists for you. Each episode is a calm reflection on gold and the trader's mind after hours. No urgency, no predictions, just context, psychology, and closure for the parts of the day that don't always end cleanly. Subscribing isn't about keeping up. It is about knowing there is a place to return to when the mind feels active and needs permission to rest. When you're ready, there will be another quiet story waiting. Another chance to set the market down and let the night do its work. For now, let the screen fade when it wants to. Let tomorrow stay where it is. You've done enough for today.